tonight, we drift once more into the sands of history, where faith, loyalty, and destiny intertwined under the quiet stars of Syria. The year is 635. The swords have grown silent, but the world stands on the edge of an empire's fading breath. As the calm conqueror, Khalid ibn al-Walid walks the roads of Homs and Aleppo, even the stones seem to whisper of change. So, settle in, take a slow breath, and let the distant echo of history guide you towards stillness and sleep. The fighting within Damascus ceased not with a gradual tapering off, but with a shocking, abrupt silence. It was a silence carved by the presence of two opposing forces meeting near the center of the city. Along the ancient Roman thoroughfare known as the Via Recta, the street called Straight, Khalid ibn al-Walid rode in from the east gate, Bob Sharkey on his dusty, battle-weary horse, his armor spotted with the blood of the Byzantine guards he had just cut down. Behind him marched his elite mobile guard, their faces necessary audacity of the night's conquest. They had taken the city by the sword, on Watan. Their right was conquest, and their expectation was spoil. From the west gate, Jabiya gate, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah approached, riding slowly amidst a crowd of Damascene elders, Christian priests, and trembling merchants. Abu Ubaidah's garments were clean, his face was serene, and the atmosphere around him was one of order and guarded relief. He held in his hand a simple parchment, the Treaty of Surrender, signed barely an hour before by the Byzantine commander, Thomas, and witnessed by the city's Christian patriarch. He had taken the city by treaty, Salhan. When the two columns met, the commanders dismounted. The contrast was a visual representation of the conflict over the soul of the conquest. Khalid was the living embodiment of the sword, decisive and relentless. Abu Ubaidah was the embodiment of the seal, gentle and covenant-bound. "Oh, Abu Ubaidah," Khalid greeted him, his voice husky from shouting commands. "The day is won. The east gate fell by force. The city is ours by right of conquest." Abu Ubaidah met his gaze with profound sadness, "And the city is ours by right of covenant, O Khalid." Accepted. The surrender of the people and the garrison. The treaty is sealed. The citizens are under the protection of God and his messenger. A treaty with a besieged man is not binding when the gates were already breached. Khalid argued, gesturing toward the bloodied east gate. "I struck for the survival of this army. Had we waited for your patient surrender, the relief force from Homs would be upon us. The city is unwatted, and we should proceed accordingly." "And if we proceed accordingly," Abu Ubaidah countered, his voice low but firm, "then we violate the promise of God and the word of his commander." When a treaty is struck, it is sacred. To break faith for the sake of plunder negates the very justice we fight to establish. We preach peace, and when peace is offered, we must accept it, regardless of the difficulty. The people believed my word, and the caliph's word is absolute. The ensuing council of war was a tense, profound debate over military necessity versus moral law, a conflict that defined the early caliphate's rapid expansion. The supremacy of mercy, Solhan prevails. The implications of the two modes of conquest were immense, reaching far beyond Damascus. Conquest, on Watan. If the city was taken by force, all public buildings, including churches, could be confiscated. The inhabitants, property, and even their freedom were forfeit, and they would be entirely reliant on the conqueror's temporary mercy. This would lead to resentment, rebellion, and the need for a perpetual, expensive garrison. Treaty Suhan. If the city surrendered by agreement, the jizya covenant tax applied. In exchange for this fixed annual sum, the lives, property, churches, and civic freedom of the populace were unconditionally guaranteed by the entire power of the nascent caliphate. This meant a stable, self-governing, and largely loyal population. Khalid, the pragmatist, saw the immediate military gain of plunder and asserting total control. Abu Ubaidah, the pious diplomat, saw the long-term political and moral gain. Was the official commander-in-chief appointed by the Caliph Abu Bakr. Khalid Abu Ubaidah declared his decision final. You have won the battle of Damascus. But you shall not lose the war for the loyalty of Syria. The treaty was signed in good faith before news of your entry could reach the gate. We are the people of the covenant. We choose the path of mercy. The city shall be held by treaty. Khalid, the man who knew no defeat, accepted the defeat of his own will. He understood that the moral integrity of the caliphate was more valuable than the gold of Damascus. It was a moment of profound discipline, showcasing that the sword of God was always subservient to the justice of God. Immediately, the orders went out. The fighting at the east gate ceased. Khalid's men, who had entered with the expectation of conquest, were ordered to halt their advance, sheathe their swords, and respect the terms of the peace. The citizens of Damascus, who had just witnessed a bloody breach in their defenses, now watched in stunned silence as the victorious Arabs stood down. The Covenant of Damascus, the Treaty of Damascus, sometimes referred to as the Covenant of Abu Ubaidah, was immediately formalized and distributed, becoming a foundational document for the subsequent conquest of the Levant. Its terms were revolutionary, contrasting sharply with the arbitrary, heavy-handed taxation and theological oppression of the Byzantine Empire. The document guaranteed the citizens of Damascus the following: safety of life and property in the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful. This is granted by Khalid ibn al-Walid to the people of Damascus. When the Muslims enter, safety is guaranteed to them for their lives, their possessions, and their churches. Religious freedom. All churches, shrines, and crosses were explicitly guaranteed against destruction or confiscation. Priests, monks, and their houses were promised protection. The Christians were free to worship as they pleased. The jizya and its exchange, in exchange for the guaranteed protection dima. Adult, non-Muslim males were required to pay the fixed jizya. This was not merely a tax, but a contractual payment for two specific benefits: exemption from military service, which Muslims were obligated to perform, and absolute security under the Caliphate's rule. Women, children, the elderly, the poor, and the clergy were entirely exempt from payment. Autonomy. The citizens were allowed to retain their customs, their local laws, and their internal city administration, provided they did not actively conspire against the Muslim state. The effect of this charter was instantaneous and devastatingly effective. When the citizens realized that the conquerors, having broken the walls, chose to honor the most merciful terms possible, panic turned to guarded acceptance, and acceptance quickly turned to strategic loyalty. They had traded a distant, tax-heavy imperial bureaucracy that persecuted them for their theology for a local, hands-on administration that offered protection and tolerance. The path of the exile, the only concession to Khalid's argument of necessity, was the treatment of the Byzantine military garrison led by the wounded Thomas. The treaty stipulated that the Byzantine soldiers, along with their families and those citizens who chose to remain loyal to Heraclius, were permitted to leave Damascus safely. They were granted a 3-day period of amnesty to travel to a designated safe zone, taking with them only what they could carry. This was a critical component of the peaceful surrender. It allowed the hardline Byzantine element to exit the province without a final, suicidal stand. The column of exiles was a pathetic, grim procession. Thomas, his face bandaged, led a weary stream of 1,000 soldiers, officials, and loyal families out of the northern gate, heading toward the relative safety of Antioch and Constantinople. They were the physical embodiment of the Roman failure, retreating from a city that the empire had held for 6 centuries. Khalid, however, remained the ultimate general. He knew that allowing a large armed body of enemy soldiers to escape to safety was militarily risky. He needed to eliminate the threat, but without violating the sanctity of the treaty. He waited the stipulated 3 days. As soon as the amnesty expired, he led his mobile guard on an audacious, breakneck chase. Utilizing his knowledge of the desert terrain and his cavalry's unmatched speed, Khalid bypassed the main northern roads the Byzantines were using. He led his men on a punishing oblique maneuver, crossing the high eastern mountains and descending quickly toward the valley near Tripoli. His aim was to cut off the Byzantine escape route, not at the head of the column, but at its end, destroying the rearguard, capturing the baggage train, and scattering the soldiers before they could regroup under the protection of the remaining Byzantine forces near Antioch. The chase was a testament to the endurance of the mobile guard, covering the distance in less than half the time it took the heavily laden Byzantine refugees. The final ambush and the end of Thomas. The Muslim cavalry caught the exhausted Byzantine column near the coastal mountains. The final engagement was brief and brutal. It was not a battle for a city, but a swift, final purge of a retreating enemy. Khalid's men struck the rearguard and the camp, scattering the disorganized soldiers and capturing the remaining wealth. Thomas, the brave defender of Damascus, was killed in the fighting, signaling the final, permanent end of the imperial defense in southern Syria. By eliminating the threat while upholding the letter of the initial agreement, Khalid achieved both military security and political integrity. He neutralized the enemy's fighting capability while ensuring that the Damascenes would be eternally grateful to Abu Ubaidah for the merciful treaty they had signed. The fall of Damascus and the resolution of the Anwatan versus Salhan conflict immediately cemented the Caliphate's reputation as a just and reliable power in the Levant. The city, the prize of Syria, was now a loyal base of operations, freely providing supplies and information, saving the Muslims immense time and resources. But the most immediate effect was that the momentum of the conquest had reached a terrifying pitch. The Byzantines, shattered at Ajnadain and ejected from Damascus, now knew that the Muslims were not raiders. They were here to stay. The pressure now shifted entirely to the remaining Byzantine garrisons in the north, especially at Homs and Aleppo. The success of the conquest had been secured, ironically, not by the sword of God, but by the covenant of mercy. This balanced the ruthlessness of Khalid in battle, tempered by the piety of Abu Ubaidah in peace, defined the early, powerful expansion of the caliphate. The next challenge would be consolidating the vast territory and preparing for the inevitable final counterstrike from the enraged Emperor Heraclius. The northward advance and local alliances, the new weight of momentum. With Damascus secured by treaty, the entire momentum of the war shifted from military confrontation to strategic consolidation. The Byzantine defense had relied on a few massive field armies and the formidable walls of its primary cities. Once Ajnadain had shattered the armies and the Treaty of Damascus had neutralized the walls, the path northward lay open. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the supreme military mind, and Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, the ethical anchor, now functioned in perfect tandem. Khalid ensured the advance was swift and secure, eliminating military threats before they could coalesce. Abu Ubaidah ensured every city and town they approached was offered the choice of peace, religious freedom, and predictable governance. The sword of God was now encased in the seal of the covenant. The goal was clear: secure the vital central Syrian corridor, the great inland road that linked Damascus to Antioch, for Emperor Heraclius could mobilize a third, final, and truly overwhelming force. The main prizes were Homs, Emesa, and Aleppo, Beroia. The journey north was less a conquest and more a strategic walkover. The local populations, largely Monophysite Christians, Syriac Christians, and Jews, had watched the drama of Damascus unfold. They saw the Roman garrison flee and the Muslim army uphold its promise of peace, while the Byzantine army meant to be their protector had levied heavy taxes, pressed their men into service, and persecuted their faith. For these people, the Arab advance was not an invasion, but a strategic exchange of distant, overbearing masters for a closer, more tolerable one. The good city, the surrender of Homs. The first major target north of Damascus was Homs, or Emesa, a city known for its wealth, strategic position, and deep Christian traditions. When Khalid's combined army approached the city gates in the late autumn, they found an environment already primed for surrender. The people of Homs were famous for their pragmatic intelligence. They sent an embassy to Abu Ubaidah, not to beg for mercy, but to negotiate a contract. The message was simple: we have no love for the Byzantines, who tax us to poverty and force us to accept their theological dogma. Prove that your terms are better and the gates are yours. The ensuing negotiations, led by Abu Ubaidah, became a masterpiece of political persuasion. He presented the covenant of safety, the very document signed in Damascus, to the Hamzi elders. The terms were explicit: fixed payment, a non-fluctuating annual jizya payment, guaranteeing exemption from all military and logistical duties, freedom of faith. All churches, including the great cathedral of St. John the Baptist, were to be left untouched and under the full control of the Christian community. Monks, priests, and religious officials were exempt from any tax whatsoever. Local governance. The local city council was permitted to continue administering civil law and public works. The elders of Homs compared this generous, transparent contract with the recent history of Byzantine rule, and as the torches dim over Aleppo's walls, Khalid gazes north, where the last storm of Rome begins to gather. Yet, for this night, there is peace. Close your eyes now. The desert is calm, the night forgiving, and tomorrow's battles can wait until morning. You've been listening to Boring Bedtime, where even the fiercest histories drift into calm.